kind words. The only problem is when they say all this nice stuff about you, you don't have much nice stuff left to say about yourself. It's all, why is that guy repeating that stuff? You know? So I first off want to thank Linda for emceeing. Linda, who was smart enough to give up the reins of the Vernal Heights Democratic Club, which I couldn't get rid of for another 17 years. It was 5 years of eager, 5 years of willing, and 5. My God, will somebody please do this? Standing in this room, doing all of that. So thank you, Linda. Paul, when I asked you here tonight, I never expected my own song. Never. And this is a first. I've been around a long time, and no one's written a ditty about me before. I want to tell everybody that Paul has a CD release party. A week from tomorrow.
No, tomorrow actually.
It's tomorrow.
Oh, well.
Good, then I won't show up next week. I'll try and show up tomorrow at the Lost Church on Cap Street. If you've never been there, it's this marvelous little theater that's worth going to simply for that. 3:30 to 6?
Yeah, 3:30.
So I'll be there after dark, when you can't be at people's doors anymore without them calling the cops. So, and quite interesting, the Tony Benn connection here, actually. Raise your hand if you know who Tony Benn is. The fringes, the people on the fringes of the crowd. Pretty much as I expected. Tony Benn was the leader of the British Labour Party left in the days before Tony Bleepman Blair did the damage that he did to the Labour Party. And as Patrick said, he was surprised that anybody had ever seen him. The connection is, Paul, as I recall, loaned me a volume of Tony Benn's writings at one point. To continue on that, when, the class that I met Paul in, I did a little bit of a course for Harry Britt at the New College. And Paul was taking that, and a couple of times I did sessions in it. And I want to mention Harry Britt today, of course, because there's people who go, well, those of you who go way back know that the only difficult race that Nancy Pelosi ever had was the first one,
Right. Yeah.
Against Harry Britt in a very peculiar type of primary that doesn't exist anymore. It was a vacancy primary, so everybody was in together, but the leaders in each party then ran in the final. And so Republicans who knew that the Republican would not be elected in the final had the opportunity to vote for the more conservative of the Democrats. And I don't know that anyone ever polled on that, but that was presumably a factor in that race. She won by, I think, 4 points in the first round. So funny, when did Harry come up? And I want to thank Patrick, of course. I actually invited him as the world's foremost authority. Those of you who remember Professor Irwin Corey, I hope won't take affront to that, but he appeared to be the world's foremost authority on meat. I got this email. I had forgotten our meeting. I got this email a while ago from somebody I didn't know, who said he had written an article on me, and did I want to fact check it, and did I know anybody who might want to print it? Okay, and there you go. That's the story. That's how we eventually met, and I'm flattered to no end. And Patrick is also a musician. This is going around here, and he has a gig December 6th, but I forget the venue.
Orson's Belly on 19th and Gulf.
The place I saw you at. Okay, 19th and Balboa, Orson's Belly. And I'm hoping we'll do a musical event somewhere in the near future. And where's Ted? Ted, do you have any gigs coming up?
I'll let you know.
Okay. Anybody else performing wants any publicity? Happy to do it. Okay. I also want to mention that we have with us here Barry Hermanson tonight, who, as some of you know, has run for this very office. Where are you, Barry? There he is. And this year is running against Scott Wiener.
Yes. Yes.
We have an alternative there. Okay, I think I've paid my dues to everyone who came before me. The first thing I want to do is actually refer to the fact that I'm wearing this button, and I thought about it at some time. And it is meant as no offense to the supporters of Elizabeth Warren, who in most years I would be supporting and thinking was one of the better presidential candidates I had ever supported, or if there happen to be any, to supporters of Tulsi Gabbard, whose insistence on arguing on sanity and foreign policy is commendable, however far she goes or doesn't go in this race. Being willing to say, you know, it's not actually a bad thing to talk to the enemy. That's peace is made between enemies, if you haven't considered that in the past. And it is a statement of partisanship, because I do think Bernie Sanders has changed everything in American politics, and I think it's an opportunity that's once in a lifetime. It didn't have to be. There didn't even have to be that one time in a lifetime. But above all, I'm wearing the thing as a simpler perspective. That whatever happens in this race in March or November, this is the race that really matters. What we do is relatively minor to the big one. Obviously, as I said, we have, I think, a unique opportunity, and of course, we have the most unbelievable goings on in Washington. I mean, I would just, any of us could sputter the same. Enough said. Okay, so why run against Nancy Pelosi? Well, imagine, if you will, that a congressional candidate were to come along and propose to run for Congress in San Francisco. And that candidate said that she wasn't a big fan of Medicare for All. And in referring to the Green New Deal, she said, the Green Dream, or whatever they call it. And she supported increases in the military budget. I suspect a lot of people would tell that candidate that she might want to look for a different district. The fact is that candidate has been representing this district for 32 years. And people look the other way. For all of her achievements, and they're considerable. First female speaker, came back a second time, the leading Democratic voice against Donald Trump. For all of the things that she does well, one thing she does not do well is represent this district.
She stammers.
That too. For instance, now I'm going to stammer. Put that in my mind. But this would never happen today. And one of the goals of any campaign against her is to get people to confront that, whether you can win or lose, to get people to look at the fact that, well, yeah, these things matter. It isn't enough to be against Donald Trump. We have to be able to unite on the things that we agree on, but fight on the things we don't agree on at the same time. We don't have time. The planet doesn't have time, if you will, to just get somebody somewhat better than Trump, then we move on from there. All of these things have to be tackled at the same time.
Yes.
So that is fundamentally, I think, the reason for one runs against her. I think it should happen all the time if there are people willing and able to do it. Medicare for All, among the issues I mentioned that she's off on, at this point in this room, I probably would be preaching to the choir. This city voted in favor of single-payer health care in 1994. The only county in the state to do it, and yet the federal representative has never seen fit to file the federal bill. And you all know we get a lot of, well, we can't go too fast, that's part of her shtick on this, don't do it all at once, gradually, etc.
Gotta solve the problem.
Let me just say that gradualism is a reality. Gradualism, however, is not a position. Gradualism is a result of compromise. You don't enter into an issue that needs to be solved immediately because there are millions of people lacking health care and say, we'll fix it gradually. You enter into the fray on that with immediately. If it comes out that you can't get immediately, okay. But we have seen that, we saw that in the in all of the debate that has gone on over changing national healthcare situation from Obama on before. Move half the way to the opposition before you start arguing. That is just, anybody should know that, whoever negotiates it. Somehow, the leading Democrats have failed to get that memo. And we had a very good talk here the other night from Hillary Ronan at the Democratic Club about the mental health situation in the new program in San Francisco. And the description of the program was great, that there would be people on call. You know, you walk around the city and you see a person out of it if you go 6 blocks. I mean, it's really shocking. But the point that you made, bottom line, is this isn't a national problem. You know, we have all the debate about homelessness, understandably, but you know, it's not the mayor's fault. It's not the police fault. It is a national issue, as is the mental health situation on our streets. As far as the Green New Deal, which has not impressed the speaker at all, what has impressed me is how far it's gotten in terms of congressional sponsorship and into the national consciousness so rapidly. I mean, it's not close to passing, obviously. It doesn't have majority sponsorship, but to get that far that quick says to me a great deal about the level of awareness in this country, even within Congress, which is the last place to show awareness in many cases. You know, it used to be when people talked about global consciousness, they were sort of talking about their latest acid trip or the really good yacht they got, and you know. But kids grow up with it now. Kids believe all that stuff that they heard at school that you should recycle, etc. And you know, as people widely know now, the secret of Bernie Sanders' success with the young voters last time was primarily on that. When asked which was the major threat to national security in one of the debates, he said climate change. Nancy Pelosi again hasn't gotten that memo. What is impressive, again, is the degree to which people understand the interconnectedness in a way that they did not before. That you can't, this isn't a national issue even, it's a global issue. The world is round, you come around the other side. There's not this myth of the endless room for capitalist expansion is not there. The impact of it is all too clear to people. We used to spend a lot of time on full employment. Remember Ron Dellums, who may not have been the greatest mayor of Oakland, but was an excellent U.S. representative, used to file a full employment bill each year. And you know, some of us dutifully did whatever we could. That is implicit now in the Green New Deal. I mean, that is an amazing leap forward. It seems to me. We used to also argue for economic conversion, right, away from the military. We would say we want to spend less on the military, but you know, there's good jobs, and a lot of them are union jobs, and they probably pay better than average because they're backed up by the U.S. government. There's a guaranteed buyer for the goods, and so we would have to come up with alternatives, but it always seemed like make work to people. It was very hard to make it stick. But again, the Green New Deal as a package has just wrapped up a whole lot of things that people worked on with not a great deal of success for a good long time. I want to hold off on foreign policy because I could go on forever on that. I don't want to do that. A couple of other things that I want to touch on just as priorities, not so much that Nancy Pelosi would be against them, but as things I think need greater emphasis than they currently get. Housing. The U.S. government has pretty much left the business of building housing for some time. That needs to change. And they need to build housing public housing that is not a synonym for housing poor people, for warehousing poor people, I should say. If you were to look at a lot of European cities, you will see they are able to build public housing for working people that seems like an appropriate place to live. There's simply no reason we can't do that. And for a little fillip on that, a change I would advise in the way this is done is that instead of borrowing, the federal government should simply appropriate. There's a major savings from not paying interest that can build a lot of units. That's a direction I think we should look at. Education has been mentioned in passing, I think. I have been in the Boston schools for over 20 years as a substitute teacher. As I always say, physics to phys ed, K to 12. I have been in more classrooms than any administrator, any regular teacher in the system. I have pretty much seen it all. I'm the world's foremost authority. Maybe not quite okay. But so we always have the question of inequality of opportunity in education. And that's a burning one. It's out there all the time. Rich neighborhood, poor neighborhood, neighborhood of people of color, neighborhood of white people, et cetera, et cetera. There is actually a solution clear at hand. And I'm not saying it would be easy to do. Full federal funding. This is done in other countries, of course. But if funding for education were per capita, that issue would largely be solved. No matter where you lived, rich neighborhood, rich state, poor, etc., it would be the same. So, not an easy goal, but it seems to me one that is clear. Economic equality. I'm not going to give you any new news on this. It's bad and getting worse. It obviously should be a major priority. The farther apart the two ends of the economy are in any country, the more the walls get built up. We need to use any means we can. There was another one of the things Hillary Ronan spoke about the other night was a corporate, I forget what the title is, a corporate inequality tax. If you pay, that's going to be put out in San Francisco. If you pay your CEO or anybody more than 100 times the average salary or wage in the company, you pay 1% of the revenue. If you pay 200%, if you pay them 200%, et cetera, et cetera. That again is not an issue that can be settled on the local level, but all of the plans that Sanders, Warren mainly have put out there should be looked at. It can't be allowed to go on. There's one particular thing I want to address in that, a subset of it, which is the question of reparations. There are a few candidates out there who support them. I don't think there are many who put it in their prime piece of literature. And, Jim's wife Suzanne, who's overdue, who designed this remembers that I wanted to put everything in this card, and she introduced me to the phrase that you don't want to make it look like a dog's breakfast. I never heard that before. It's one of the many things I'm grateful for in this. At the risk of making this piece a dog's breakfast, I chose to include the question of reparations here. The reparations is for Black America, not obvious on that, is not an easy question. And we should be understanding as to why it is not an easy question. And I got an insight into it simply from talking to a cousin, which I got a lot of my insights about people who think differently than I politically, who said, you know, we came here and had to make our way up, why can't they? Well, there is a simple reason, as we know. They didn't get to bring anything. They didn't get to have a family. The experience of American slavery is actually one of the worst slavery societies that's ever existed on the planet. And you know, ancient slavery in Rome and Greece was nowhere near as bad as this. And the problem we face in this, and I'd say because I think we do want to understand why it's difficult. Most African Americans are descendants of slaves. Most non-African Americans, include everybody, are not the descendants of slave owners. So why is this my problem? I didn't do it, my parents, grandparents, etc. didn't do it. So we should just understand the hurdle we have in trying to explain this legacy to people. Anyhow, I did want to just pick that one out. Finally, on the issues of foreign policy. It was mentioned before twice the various places I have gone, and I'm going to still mention one of them myself. Foreign policy, I think of as the final frontier in a lot of ways in politics. What I mean is this. If someone were to tell you that they didn't think there needed to be any change in our energy policy, they would be considered a crank at this point in time. Someone who says we need no particular change in our foreign policy is generally called a statesman. It's bonkers what we do, but we keep doing it because most people feel they don't know. You know, this is dangerous stuff. And when I was in Bosnia, as mentioned, I spent some time there for doing voter registration and elections. I was in the midst of one of the most absurd recent wars in terms of the ability of someone in the U.S. to understand. There are many others in the world that I don't pretend to know, but the idea of what was going on in Bosnia was patently absurd, right? If we were to walk in there, we would see a Serb, a Croat, and a Muslim, and we couldn't tell the difference. And they claimed to speak different languages. They use two different alphabets for the same language. One is considered Serbian, one is considered Croatian. The height of the absurdity of that was in the Dayton peace talks, where they had simultaneous translation going on the whole time. You had German channel and French and English, etc. And they had Serbian channel, Croatian channel, Bosnian channel is what they called the other one. They were all tuned to the same person. There was no difference. At the same time, you realized that people did understand that they might be killed because they were a Serb, not a Croat. And a Muslim might be defended by someone who is a Muslim. So there's a reason why that we need to understand why it is the final frontier. But nonetheless, there is no way that if we understand that the planet cannot continue to survive the abuse of our energy policy currently, there's no way it can continue to survive the abuse of our military policy. These days people talk a lot about the great amount of energy expended by the military, and that's all true, but that's really the tip of the iceberg. Difficult as it is, it should be at the forefront of any politics to figure out how do we get out of this. I'll be reasonable. Hey, I said, you know, compromise and gradualism was a result, but I'll say this. How about we have somewhere around 800 military bases and no one knows it's a secret? How many there are? If you didn't know that, it's a secret, don't ask. How about we close half of them and then we talk? I think that might be a reasonable compromise. There's, as I said, I could go on foreign policy, and I am going on too long. But there's a couple of things that I've touched on in this campaign that I want to mention to you. My elevator speech, which has never been given in an elevator, but on many front doors, is, in a nutshell, I support Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, an end to our endless wars, and a Marshall Plan for Central America. And sometimes people go, what? And what I have been arguing, and I'm not the only one, I know Julian Castro actually raised the concept in a presidential debate. The Marshall Plan happened after World War II because people who didn't generally believe in a great deal of foreign aid now did, for their own reasons. I believe we have a potential situation like this now. People who think that we basically owe reparations to the people of Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala for our intervention in their wars, think we should help the people of those countries. People who never want to see anybody from those countries appear at our border might be open to it. The business community that generally hates this sort of stuff, and the foreign policy community is worried about China's Silk Road policy. El Salvador signed up for the program a while ago. The upshot of all this being, what about we make a goal that we try and do something substantial enough that people are no longer desiring to leave behind everything they knew, give up their life savings and maybe more, and risk their lives to come to this country. Is there a way that we can change that? I think we have an opportunity that is quite unusual because of the confluence of those things. Finally, on this, the question of Turkey's attack on Syria. What struck me in all of that is the Democrats unanimously condemned the president's decision or intent to remove troops. He didn't really ever do it. But what they never did was try and cut off the source of the problem. Who's the main source of the weapons that Turkey was using? The United States. Was that in the resolution? It was not. It is much easier, unfortunately, in Congress to say send troops than to cut off weapons. If you want to change the direction of the country, that has got to be reversed. Okay, so why me for this? A lot of people, or a couple of people have already talked about this. In a certain sense, I view running against Pelosi as a continuation of work I've been doing for some time. I have tried in the Progressive Democrats of America particularly, and also when I was president of this club, to find ways to bring foreign policy back home. To the ballot in 2008, to the Democratic State Convention 2018, various resolutions before the Central Committee, and prevailed over Pelosi's position in each and every occasion. Almost every occasion, sorry. So the hour grows late, so I won't go on in great detail of that. People have admirably talked about what I've done in the past and what I would try and continue. I want to finish with something on this race, the way it actually is. This is a long shot within a long shot. I'm quite aware of this. Those of you who have paid any attention to this know that last year, 3 Democrats ran to Pelosi's left, one of whom entered in the last possible week. They spent $225,000, and a Republican made it to second place with 9% of the vote. It seemed to me that obviously 2 things were in order. Number one, was there a way to unite behind a candidate? Which I proposed the concept of the progressive primary in an article I wrote back in April. No buy-in from the other candidates, but I would say there is some progress on that front. There is a plan to hold an event with all three candidates in January, and I think that will be unprecedented, actually. We all appear at little club meetings and speak for 3 minutes. So I'm glad to report some progress on that. The other question was the money. $225,000 went for naught.